All right, good morning. Welcome to another ride with me to the gym. On my way to the gym to do a full body day that has a mostly lower body focus. Big movement that I'm really looking forward to today is the Hatfield squats. That's my big lower body movement in today's program that I'm working on, making some progress week over week, carried it over from the last training block. So pretty stoked about that. What I want to talk to you about today is applying the 80-20 rule, or some variation of the 80-20 rule, to how you approach supplementation. So pretty often in the fitness industry, primarily with nutrition, when we talk about the 80-20 rule, that is usually defined as I eat very nutritious, health-focused foods 80% of the time, and then I eat more like the fun, ultra-processed, however you want to define it, foods 20% of the time. I take a little bit of a different spin on that depending on the goals for who I'm talking to, and I will ask them to reframe it as 80-20 not being what I do 80% of the time versus 20% of the time. I ask them to take a look at, with their caloric intake, 80% of the calories that they take in, fitting that category of mostly primarily whole foods, minimally processed, primarily nutrient rich, micronutrient rich, things like eating full cuts of meat, or eating oats, or eating fruits, eating vegetables, things like that, versus say like chips, or I'm trying to think of the things that I enjoy, popcorn, ice cream, things like that. So I take a little bit of a different spin on it when I'm working with particular folks, depending on what their goals are, especially when their goals are primarily health focused, and I'm taking more of the habits-based approach. I ask them to think about it instead of 80% of the time. I want you to think 80% of what you take in. So I also think about that in terms of supplements. Very often, and at this point, I think most people at least who are probably at least like somewhat tuned into this channel, that means you are not, for the most part, probably not a beginner in the fitness industry. You've been, or on your fitness journey, you've been at this for some time now, at least a couple of years at this point. So you're not new to a lot of the messaging around the importance of eating protein, drinking water, getting your steps in, right? That's just an assumption that I'm going to make here. And so very often folks will acknowledge like, hey, I'm definitely not getting in enough protein. I need to get in more protein. And it's not completely unheard of. In fact, I think it's very common that the overwhelming majority of the people immediately jump into, okay, what are some things I can do to increase my protein? And now, with being in a market or just a time where there's so many like protein rich snacks and things like that, I think of like the protein Pop-Tarts, the protein donuts, the protein chips, and then you've got, your protein shakes and different things like that. I'm just seeing this trend where we jump right into, okay, well, if I need to get more of that thing, let me look at the supplement version of getting more of that thing, versus looking at where am I currently getting my whole food sources for that thing. So for example, with protein, what are my whole food sources that are currently contributing to my protein intake? Let's say that I've identified that I want to get in an average of 100 grams of protein. Currently, how many grams of protein am I getting in? Commonly, folks will be at like 50 or 60 grams of protein, like total, that they're getting in throughout the day. And so then they're like, all right, well, let me figure out a way to get in 40 more grams. Ooh, I can add a shake. That's going to be about 20 to 25 grams of protein with one scoop at a shake, and that'll get me to 80 something, and then we're all good. I recommend a little bit of a different approach there. Where instead of immediately looking at what you can do to try to supplement to fill in that gap, and that's something that I learned from one of my coaches a while back, was thinking about supplements in terms of filling in the gaps. Take a look first at how big of a gap you're trying to fill in. So if we go with that 100 grams of protein example, just for the sake of conversation, if we're currently at, let's say, 50, and we're trying to get to 100, that is a very large gap. And I don't recommend that the first option is trying to fill in that gap with supplements. I recommend that the first option be, okay, of the 50 that I'm currently getting in, how much of that is coming from whole food sources? Let's say that it's maybe about 30 or so. Okay, well, let's take a look at what are some ways that we can implement some primarily whole food type sources, some minimally processed stuff that will help us increase our protein, and we can get that gap between where our protein is and where we want it to be, get that a little bit smaller. So an 80-20 type rule, this is not based in science or anything like that. This is a suggestion to possibly help with reframing what things look like when you're trying to hit that goal, whether it be with protein, whether it be with fiber. That can be another one too. Taking a look at, okay, well, out of 100 grams of protein, how close can I get to 80% of that? So how close can I get to 80 grams of that being from primarily whole food sources, and then fill in the other 20? Now that can seem really daunting to folks. I don't usually recommend trying to go from 0 to 100 real quick. I recommend trying to make incremental progress. So if you're somebody who's at 50, I don't recommend immediately trying to get to 100. I recommend, let's start with, how do we go from 50 to 60, stabilize that. How do we go from 60 to 70, and then slowly working your way towards it. So if the 80-20 ratio seems a bit intimidating, then starting with something like a 60-40, just a different way to kind of think about 80-20 as it relates to supplementation. Do the same thing with fiber. Let's say that on average, you are looking to get in somewhere around 30 grams of fiber per day. So you immediately jump on a supplement that gets you like 15 grams of fiber. I'm going to challenge you to reframe that with, how many fruits and vegetables are you currently getting in? Because many of those can be very fiber rich. I think right off the top of my head, I think about raspberries. I remember when I was looking at improving what my fiber intake was, got a tip from one of my coaches around like swapping out some of the fruit that I was using with my oatmeal. I think at the time, actually I wasn't using fruit with my oatmeal. But at the time they recommended, hey, why don't you add raspberries in there? Because the raspberries, I think it was an average of 9, somebody can fact check me on this, I think it was 9 grams of fiber per cup. And so that was an easier way to push that more towards the goal that I wanted to be at, versus immediately thinking, okay, well, let me go get a fiber supplement and that'll fill in the gaps. So hopefully that's helpful. Different way to kind of approach thinking about the 80-20 rule as it relates to implementing supplements into your routine. All right, we're done. Let's go lift.